Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. Welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today I am wrapping up my reading for the month of July. Now this was a difficult reading month for me. I definitely found myself in a reading slump, and I didn't read very much all through the middle of July. There are a couple of reasons for that. First of all was just what was going on generally outside of reading. I was a little bit busy. I had a lot going on that I was thinking about. So yeah, that was definitely a problem. But I also had a book that I had picked up that was I really didn't like. And I am going to talk about that one at the end. So stay tuned to hear about a DNF that I eventually decided to do, which helped to unblock my slump so that I could kind of move on with my life and actually finish some books and actually feel accomplished for this month in terms of my reading. So I don't have too many books to talk to you about today. In the end, I read 4 books, but several of them are very short. So we'll get to that as we go. Okay, let's start with the book that I read off the back of a very good reading month, the month before in June. I had started it in June. No, I didn't. I started at the beginning of July. I tell a lie. And it took me a couple of days to read. I actually read this one while I was on a trip, which if you look several videos back, you will see I did a book haul from that trip, and also the video before I also recorded on that trip. Anyway, the book that I read was this one, The Membranes by Ta-Wei. This is a book that I was reading with my Around the World book club, and this was the book we chose for Taiwan. So this was a really unusual choice for our book club because it's definitely a genre book. So it's a sci-fi, and it's set in sort of an imagined future. So it says on the back, in the late 21st century, humanity has migrated to domes at the bottom of the sea to escape devastating climate change. Momo is the most celebrated dermal care technician in all of T-City, but after meeting her estranged mother, she begins to explore her true identity, a journey that leads to questioning the bounds of gender, memory, self, and reality. First published in Taiwan in 1995, The Membranes is a classic of queer speculative fiction in Chinese. So this is a translated book, and the translator is Larissa Heinrich. So yeah, this was a really interesting book. I unfortunately missed the discussion that my book club had about this book, which I would have had more insights for you from. And I would say also, like I would call this a dystopian sci-fi, which is not really my usual go-to genre. So just to clarify, I was reading something outside of my comfort zone here. But this one was okay. There were some elements of this book that kind of pulled me out of the story a couple of times, and they were things to do with contradictions in the world building. So it would say one thing, and then like a few, maybe no more than 10 pages later, something would be said which contradicted what was said earlier, and it just, the confusion of that pulled me out of the story multiple times. So it was a bit of a difficult read for me. There were some unexpected twists and turns, which I won't spoil here in case you're going to read it. And there were some like very interesting elements. The sci-fi elements to it were quite interesting. But overall, this was just a 3-star read for me. But yeah, I'm glad to have read it and to have tried something that was a little bit outside my comfort zone. So I finished that one on the 10th of July. The next book that I finished was not until the 27th of July, and it's a book that I picked up on the 27th of July and finished in one sitting, and that is Heartstopper Volume 2 by Alice Oseman. I read Volume 1 of Heartstopper very recently for the first time, and I absolutely adored it. This is the second installment, so I won't talk about the plot of this one because obviously it follows on from what happens in the previous one. Although very generally speaking, this is very much a establishment of relationship kind of book. And it was very wholesome and sweet, very delightful. The awkwardness of volume 1, because there was sort of like a bit of tension in volume 1, is resolved here, and you just kind of get adorable couple stuff. So I loved this. It was really beautiful, and it was a 5-star read for me. And this is the book that helped me to get out of my reading slump. The next book was one that I had been reading for it basically took me exactly a month to read. I picked it up right at the end of June, and I finished it right at the end of July. And that is Under Milkwood by Dylan Thomas. This edition, I should say, has an introduction which I didn't read because I didn't want to preempt it. I just wanted to go straight into the actual play itself. And then also at the end there are a bunch of notes which again I didn't read. So I literally just read the middle bit, which was this much. So I read that much. But yeah, I very much enjoyed, this is actually a reread for me. I read this book, studied this book in high school. Sorry, I should say it's a radio play, was its initial intent. And it's described as an orchestration of voices, sights and sounds that conjure up the dreams and waking hours of an imagined Welsh seaside village within the cycle of one day. So it happens over the course of one day, and you are jumping perspectives for a bunch of these this small townspeople, and they are real characters. They're all, I would say, almost verging on caricatures of people. They're very over the top, but they're very lovable in their own way. And I remember that from reading it as a teenager, and I enjoyed that aspect of it again. So yeah, it feels like, because this is such a short play, you only very barely get to know any of the characters, but they're all lovable in their own way, and you fall in love with them very quickly. It's very tongue-in-cheek. There's a lot of humour in here, a lot of kind of over-the-top characterization, I would say. But yeah, very enjoyable. I gave this one 4 stars, and I'm glad to have reread it. And the last book that I picked up and finished in one day, and that this was right on the cusp of the end of July. I just wanted something that I could read really quickly, because I wanted to read in bed, but I didn't want to get into anything that was too heavy or too long. I just wanted something that I could kind of knock over very quickly, and knock over very quickly I did, and that is We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I apologise if I've mispronounced her name. This is, I discovered, because I bought this secondhand and I've had it for a little while, but it's in the introduction to it, it says it is a modified version of a talk that she delivered in 2012. It's like a TED talk. So it's sort of a written version, modified and made more appropriate for a written sort of thing. Now, I would say there is nothing particularly revolutionary in here in terms of ideas, that she's not discussing anything particularly new. If you're familiar at all with any level of like what feminism is and the kinds of issues that women face, you're not going to hear anything in here that's going to like blow your mind. But I would say it's written in a very accessible sort of way, and it's definitely something that I could see a beginner, someone who's new to feminism, finding an easy introduction. So if you had, somebody that you wanted to sort of give them something that's very readable, very easy to digest. She talks about things in quite a plain way, that would be very understandable for someone who had a very minimal background in understanding the concepts. So yeah, I think if you gave this to a young person or to like an older person who's new to what feminism is, it might be great. But for me, it was just a 3-star read. But I'm glad to have knocked it off off my TBR, because I have had it for some time. I've actually got a couple of these like little essay type of books that are very short, and it's kind of motivated me to kind of get in and read the other ones. So perhaps you'll see me talking about those on a future wrap up. Now I am going to talk about the book that I DNF'd as promised earlier in the video, and that is The Belle of the World by Gregory Day. This is a book that was shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Award, which has now been announced, and I'm not going to talk about it any further because I'm not happy with the very inevitable result. Basically, it's the book that I didn't like and I've spoken about multiple times, by Alexis Wright, praiseworthy. That won. Very expected that it won, but I'm not happy about it. But I'm not going to talk about it anymore. This was another book that was on that shortlist, and I am attempting to read at least the shortlist of the Miles Franklin. I had hoped to do it before the winner was announced, but I hit my reading slump, and this book is partly responsible for that. And that is because I really was not enjoying this book. But I picked it up again on that same day that I had picked up Heartstopper, and I had maybe read about 20 pages of it at that point. I read to about 50 pages or so, and I decided to DNF it. So essentially, the premise of this book sounds like the kind of thing that I might be into. So we are following a young girl called Sarah. She is from a wealthy Australian family. She gets sent off when she's a young person. This happens before the beginning of the book. She gets sent off to England to go to a sort of finishing school of sorts. It's set in the past. It doesn't say exactly when, but you kind of get the impression that it's kind of maybe the interwar period or somewhere in that vicinity. And she returns from this boarding school in England. First of all, she goes to stay with her eccentric Uncle Fernie, who is at the time living in Italy. And she stays with him for a little while and then comes back to Australia to live with her mum. We sort of find out that her parents seem to be separated. Dad is, I think, in New Zealand and mum is in Australia. I got the impression that maybe mum was an alcoholic or she had some kind of a problem with substances, and she eventually sends Sarah off to go to her to the family property where her Uncle Fernie, who she had stayed with in Italy, is sort of managing that property. And so where I DNF'd the book, we hadn't quite gotten to the property yet. So she had sort of been in this holding pattern at a different property, staying with a woman who may or may not have been an Aboriginal person. It wasn't very clear, but she was definitely behaving in a way that was not typical of women of the time, according to Sarah. And basically she is sort of like dealing with some stuff. So 2 reasons why I decided to DNF this book. The first is it's horrifically overwritten. That sounds really mean. It's overwritten in a way that just seemed farcical to me. So I'm going to read you a little passage that I think exemplifies it, and this is basically where I was just like, you know what, I think I'm going to stop. So I'm going to read you a paragraph, and this is from page 45, so we're a little way in. She walked back, drank tea, a compromise, out on the veranda. Maisie left her alone, going out to hang washing on the line that was threaded from the tank stand to the big manna gum, standing hard and white in the garden's southern edge. Sarah watched the garments flick, the sheets, the tea towels unfurl. She detected a brightness in the washing, like the green among the plants, squares and rectangles of light against the entangled bush backdrop. A sound came into her mind, then a word, the verb crisping. She placed the sound of this word in her teeth and registered the kinship of its sibilance with the river wind in the trees. That's just too much. It's overwritten. And I could tolerate sometimes it felt just like a bit of poetic writing, but other times like that, it was just too much. The sibilance with the river wind, it's too much. It's too much. And the other aspect of this book that made me decide to definitively DNF it was Sarah talks about in this book when she was staying in Italy, she was staying with Uncle Fernie, but he kind of left her to her own devices. And she ended up, and at the time she would have been a teenager, because she's still a teenager now, I believe, or at least, a very young woman. She ended up having a sexual relationship with a man who she describes as old enough to be her grandfather. And when a teenager is sleeping with a person who is old enough to be her grandfather, and that it's being talked about in, so this man was in his 60s, and it's not condemned in the book, at least not at this point. It's talked about in a way that is like, oh, it was a sort of formative experience for her, as opposed to the fact that relationship, quote unquote, is completely inappropriate, and that man is essentially a pedophile. And just the way that it was spoken about and not condemned, because I think a book can have that in it, but it needs to be clear, and the plot point needs to be that it was not okay that it happened. And that was not the impression that I got from the way that it was written about in the book. So I was like, you know what, it's overwritten. This has just happened. I don't want to have anything to do with this book anymore, which is a shame because I bought it and it's a hardback book. So I'm going to be, this book will be exiting my library. So yeah, that is The Belle of the World by Gregory Day. Thank you. No, thank you. I've had enough. Okay, but I'm proud of myself for DNFing it because I think that was something that I definitely needed to do to be able to move forward, and to unblock myself essentially, and unblock my brain from, because this book was stopping me from reading stuff that I actually want to read. So goodbye to that book, and I'm proud of myself for DNFing it because it's really hard, especially when you've paid good money for a book, and it's a book that's been shortlisted for a prize, a very important prize in your country, and it has that kind of stuff in it. So I don't know, I don't know what's going on with the Miles Franklin this year, but I'm not too pleased. Anyway, let's move on. I have certainly moved on from this book. Now that I've spoken to you about it, I don't have to think about it anymore, which is great. So that's it for my wrap up for the month of July. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments if you have any thoughts about either this one or any of the 4 that I finished in the month, because I would love to talk to you about those. I'm really excited to keep going with Heartstopper. I have one more in my collection, so I have number 3 and I need to get volume 4 and 5. So yeah, very excited to keep going with that series, and I'm so pleased that I finally got this one off my TBR because it's something that's been sitting around for some time, and for a book so short that I was able to knock over in an evening, like that's unacceptable. Let me get these off my shelves because they definitely are very, very readable. Alright, so talk to me down in the comments if you've read any of these and have any thoughts. Otherwise, I will catch you on the next one. Bye.